So everybody, if you're listening to us for the first time, please subscribe, share this. People on the radio that are listening, we appreciate that too. We have Dr. Thomas Hemingway back on, and you'll hear him. Uh, well, you'll hear him twice, it's because I think we're going to keep bringing him back on because he is really a wealth of knowledge. He did write a book. It's Preventable: 5 Powerful Practices to Avoid Disease and Build Unshakable Health. Doc, thanks so much for coming back on. A lot of things to talk about in health right now, so we appreciate this.
Oh, Rob, man, the pleasure is mine. Thanks for having me. Always great to chat. And yeah, happy to serve and just share some really important information.
www.thomashemingway.com, the website, the podcast you can find there or on any of your podcasting sites. There's all sorts of stuff. Definitely check that out on his end too. Besides the book, let's talk about the book. Why do you feel like it was time to write a book on this?
Yeah. So I'll be honest, I've been in medicine for 20 plus years now. And when I did my training almost 30 years ago, I used to see folks, in their 60s, 70s, 80s coming in with, heart attacks and strokes and things like that. And the last decade of my practice, I've literally been seeing folks younger than I. And Rob, I consider myself really young. I turned 50 next year. And I got, as you know, I got 6 kids and they keep me active and doing so many things. And I feel like I'm a teenager. And so I'm turning 50, but I was seeing guys and gals both coming in with first time heart attacks in their 30s and 40s. And I was going, and even stroke. I was literally seeing people on a fairly regular basis come in with stroke that were much younger than I. And I'm thinking, what are we doing? Something is not right in this country. I'm really proud of what I am able to do in the ER setting. I'm a board certified emergency physician. So if you're in the throes of acute illness, injury, you fall and you dislocate your shoulder, I'm your guy. I'll get that back in for you, no problem. And I feel like we do great with emergency care in this country, but for the chronic disease care, which is actually 90% of our healthcare dollars are being spent on diabetes, heart disease, cancer, things of the like, which are almost entirely preventable. And most doctors don't even tell you that. They just reach for the prescription pad. They say, hey, you need this medicine for your high blood pressure or this medicine for your elevated blood sugar because you're bordering on diabetes, or you need this for, this other condition. And most of these things can actually be dealt with and even prevented if you start at the root cause. And most doctors don't talk about this. So I felt like it's time, because the trajectory is all wrong. You probably know this, Rob, because I think we've chatted about it, but the first time in human history, and in well over 100 years, about 5 years ago, our human lifespan here in the United States started to go down. And this is literally the first time this has happened in our developed country. Every year it's gone up for over 100 years until about 5 years ago. So all this is even pre-COVID, our life expectancy started to drop. And it has been dropping each and every year, of course, more with COVID because all of the comorbidities involved and all of the things, but it's not right. We have the technology, we have so much available treatment wise, but we're missing the mark. And the biggest area in which we are lacking is in the prevention, in this area of chronic disease, which is basically diabetes type 2, especially, which is nearly entirely preventable, obesity, hyperlipidemia, which is high cholesterol, heart disease, which is almost entirely preventable and remains the number one killer in both the US and women and men and worldwide. And we're just not doing enough. So that's why I wrote the book, because really there is much more that we can do than people realize. And it's much more than just grabbing a quick fix prescription from your doctor. There's actually a lot you can do within the confines of your own home, things that are within your power each and every day. And so I wanted to share some really valuable tools that we can do literally ourselves and not rely on our doctor. Because let's face it, a lot of doctors miss the mark on this and they're not helping us. We are getting sicker each and every year as a nation and as a world. Amidst the technology, amidst the massive healthcare spending, we're just not getting it right. So that's why I want to empower you with the tools so that you can get healthy on your own, with or without your doctor.
ThomasHemingway.com. The podcast is Unshakable Health. You can check it out there on all your podcasting sites. And also, obviously, the book Preventable, which we'll be talking about more right now. Can we talk about preventable? Because you talk about the five powerful practices to avoid disease and build unshakable health. Talk about that, and what are those five?
Yeah, I'd love to speak to that. And firstly, I'll be the biggest topic on there is food, and I'll be the briefest on the food part because we spoke
Right.
quite a bit about the food, but food is either your best possible medicine or it's a slow poison. And you get to pick that, 3 times a day, sometimes more than that. So number one, food first, try to eat the real foods that we talked about. There's really only 3 things to avoid here, Rob. It's really, really simple. You avoid the highly processed sugars, especially the high fructose corn syrup, all the fake sugars out there. Sugar is one of these topics that can be super deceiving because you look on a label of something and it says like brown rice syrup. And you're like, oh, that sounds like it could be healthy. It's still sugar, it's still crap. Try to avoid the sugars as much as possible, especially when they're processed. Anything high fructose corn syrup containing, you got to dump that stuff. So that's number one. Second, you want to avoid the highly processed grains and flours. Many of us are gluten sensitive or have a little challenges with gluten. And the reason for that, Rob, most people have no idea, but 200 years ago when we ate, say, homemade bread, and the cool thing is if you go to Europe today, most people that are gluten intolerant can actually eat the bread of Europe because they use a different grain. Here we use this super hardy, it's called dwarf wheat that is able to survive all the pesticides that they spray on it. So it's not the type of wheat that we used to use a couple hundred years ago. It has a super high gluten content, which is different than this wheat that we've grown for thousands of years. So the type of wheat is different. I basically try to eat nothing from this country that is bread or a bread like product, a cracker, a chip, or any of those things. I avoid them all, but why not? I mean, it's just hard. If you're traveling and you're in, the Mediterranean and they have a home baked, amazing sourdough bread that comes from a starter or a sprouted, wheat bread that they have to, keep it in the refrigerator because it's so fresh that it'll literally mold in one day. Like that stuff is going to be way more healthy. It's just not as easily obtainable and available here in the US. So I pretty much avoid all grains to be honest. So avoid the highly processed grains and flours. That's number 2. And number 3, avoid what are called the seed oils, which is basically anything that says on the label vegetable oil. So this is the highly processed corn oil, safflower, sunflower, rice bran oil. Soybean is probably the most common one. We think, oh, soybeans are healthy, but when they turn that crap into an oil, that stuff is literally rancid and toxic. So there's 7 or 8 of these highly processed oils. They all fall under their umbrella of what's called seed oil. You got to avoid that. And almost every food that comes in a bag, a box, or with a barcode that literally has a label, almost all of them have one of these toxic oils. And if you think about it, it's so much easier to remember the very few healthy oils out there. Think about our Italian friends. An extra virgin olive oil is the type of oil you want because all they do is they take an olive, they press it, they squeeze it, and you get the oil. There's no high heat, there's no high pressure, there's no deodorizing, there's no bleaching. All of those processes are involved with making vegetable oil, but not with extra virgin olive oil, as well as, for example, from Hawaii, like I am, coconut oil, same thing. You just squeeze the coconut, you get the oil. Avocado, same thing. It's a very oily fruit. You press that, you get oil. So those are the 3 healthiest oils: avocado, olive oil, and coconut oil. You just got to be careful because they often adulterate these things in products and they say, oh, check this out, Rob. We have this amazing Newman's Own dressing that has olive oil. And guess what? You look at the label, the first ingredient is soybean oil. The 5th ingredient is olive oil. So they're very deceptive. You have to actually read the whole label. You can't just read the name of what the thing is called because olive oil is more expensive than vegetable oil. That's the reason. You can buy, a gallon of vegetable oil at Costco for $5. If you were going to buy a gallon of olive oil, that would be $100. So, it's simple economics here. But when you go to the things to avoid, it's really that simple. I call it the evil triad or the dirty triad. It's the highly processed sugar, the highly processed flours, and the seed oils. You avoid those 3, you eat real food, you're done. That's the food part. Number 2, okay, here's the thing. I love mnemonics, right? I'm a doctor. I went to medical school. We had these memory aids that helped us. So I created a mnemonic called FMSGs, right? Nobody likes MSG anyway. So let's just use it to help us remember things. So the F is food. The M is movement. every day you have to do some kind of movement, whatever that is. My go-to, I know it sounds crazy, as athletic and active as I am, is walking, right? We're bipeds. We were born to walk. Like, all of us know how to walk. It's something we can easily do. You don't have a gym membership to do this. You just walk around your house, walk around the block. If you have an office building, every, 1 to 2 hours, take a walk up and down the stairs, do something every hour or two, whether it be a 2-minute exercise, a 5-minute exercise. You don't need to go to a gym. You just have to constantly move your body throughout that day. My favorite nowadays, Rob, is just walking, because we all know how to do it. Doesn't take any special skill, doesn't take any equipment, and it's super healthy. In fact, if you were to walk every time you ate, like for example, you eat breakfast, then you walk for 10 minutes. You eat lunch, you walk for 10 minutes. You eat dinner, you walk for 10 minutes after. You've walked for 30 minutes. And actually, those 30 minutes are way more powerful than if you scheduled 30 minutes into your day where you're going to go for one continuous 30-minute walk. The health benefits of those 3 10-minute walks, because you did them right after eating, are significantly greater than if you walk 30 minutes all in a row, because it helps you digest your food. It decreases that glucose and corresponding insulin spike, which is less likely to make you diabetic later in life or to gain weight, and all these kinds of insulin resistance issues that we can talk about later. But walking is my go-to. And then the second go-to I have, this sounds really crazy, but it has a small cost. You know what the cost is? The cost is that of a cardboard box. I literally have a box right now. You can't tell, but on my desk, I have a cardboard box. My computer is sitting on top of this box right now. And so I have a standing desk. I stand most of the day. I work from home several days a week. And when I do, I am always standing. Why do I do that? Because I can move up and down. I can get my blood flowing, keeps me more awake and productive. If I sit down after about an hour, I get sleepy. I get tired. If I'm standing, I can move while I'm working. And you've heard of the phrase, right? That sitting is the new smoking. Well, that's not too far from the truth. Sitting exactly corresponds hour per hour. The more you sit in a day, your chances of all of these illnesses that I'm trying to help you prevent go up. It's literally directly correlated. So the more you sit in a day, the more likely you'll get overweight, you'll get diabetes, you'll get heart disease, you'll get cancer. So you got to move. And one of the simplest fixes is just get a box. We all have them around. Amazon comes every other day, in my house, because we got 6 kids, but I literally take a box, put it on my desk, put my computer on top of it, and I stand. So that's my secret for movement. Just incorporate a little bit each and every day. You don't need a gym membership. Okay. FMSG. We're halfway there. The S is sleep. Sleep is the most powerful, inexpensive tool that we can use for our advantage. I think, sadly, the last couple of years during COVID, we have been the worst at sleep. And we literally could have been the best, because many of us no longer had to commute to work. So we were saving maybe 2 hours a day where we were in our car driving, and we could be home, and then we could have added that to our sleep quota, because the reality is most of us need between 7 and 8 hours of sleep. It's hard to maintain optimal health if you're getting less than 7 hours of sleep. I'm one of the guys that falls into that smaller category where if you've heard of, there's been books and books written about sleep, but there are 3 main subtypes of the way that people sleep. Some people are the night owls, some people are the early risers. Some need a little bit more sleep than others. I'm kind of in the category that I don't need as much sleep, but what I've noticed is if I do sleep 7 hours or even 8, I feel amazing. Like, I feel slam dunk 10 times better than if I don't sleep. And my wife reminded me of this as a physician of 20 plus years. When I wasn't sleeping well, I was a little bit grouchy. I wasn't super pleasant. Beyond that, I actually was insulin resistant. I had a pre-diabetic state called insulin resistance, where my blood sugar, when I would wake up in the morning early and check it, it was a little bit higher than it should have been. And the reason why is because I wasn't sleeping my quota of 7 or 8 hours. I was sleeping like 5.5 or 6 hours. And I didn't really appreciate it, because when I went to medical school, and it's not the professor's fault, but back in those days, almost 30 years ago, we didn't know all of the, important research, the things that have come up in the last decade that have shown us why we need to sleep. We knew that if you didn't sleep, you felt terrible and you couldn't perform as well on IQ tests and all these kind of things, but we didn't really know why you need to sleep. And 10 years ago, Jeffrey Iliff and Dr. Nadegaard out of the University of Rochester came up with what's called the glymphatic system hypothesis, which has been proven now. They've studied it. And basically in your brain, just like in your body, you have channels that help you to get rid of all the waste products that occur during the day. In the body, we call that lymph, the so-called lymphatic system. In the brain, we call it the glymph, GLYMPH, glymphatic system. And what that does is it basically eliminates the waste products, the toxins, the buildups of all the crap that happened during your daily metabolism. And you basically take out the trash every night while you're sleeping. So this is the way to prevent all of the scary conditions that we don't want to get. The dementia, right? The Alzheimer's dementia, which are now calling type 3 diabetes. One of the most effective ways to prevent that, besides eating a healthy diet and no processed foods, is to get your quality 7 or 8 hours of sleep a night, because it's during that sleep that your brain can flush out all these toxins. And it does not happen during the day. It just doesn't happen. It only happens effectively while you sleep. So that's the sleep part. Do you have any questions before we move on to the last two?
No, let's move on to the last two because I do have some questions from the
Okay.
first. That
All right. I'll make the
were-
last two pretty quick here. So MSG. So we're down to the G, and the G topic is gut health. And this is a really huge topic. I'm not even going to really get into it, but what I will say, which is super powerful, is that if you focus on the food, the movement, the sleep, and then the last S is stress optimization, that if you focus on improving those, your gut health will also improve, because it makes
Speaking
sense,
about
right?
the
What we feed
microbiome.
the microbiome, what
Yes.
we feed ourselves also feeds them. So if we feed them the things that help them to thrive, they can better help us, because it's really a symbiotic process. When I was in medical school, we knew nothing about this. We had no idea that we are literally outnumbered by our gut microbes. So these are bacteria, viruses, fungi, parasites, all these living organisms that are in us, that live on our skin, that live within us in our GI tract. Most of them are in our GI tract, in our intestinal tract. Yeah. The overwhelming majority, 30 some odd trillion of these guys. And they have about 10 times the amount of DNA that we have as humans. So not only they outnumber us, but there's more DNA there. And we often ignore them, which is really a waste, because if we work together, these guys can help us live better, healthier, happier. I mean, most people have heard that quoted data that serotonin, to the biggest extent in our entire body, exists in the gut. Over 90% of all the serotonin in the entire body exists in the gut, in the GI tract, right? 90%. And also our immune system, somewhere between 70 and 80% of our immune system is in our gut as well. And so if we pay attention to how we treat our gut, which starts with these basic principles that I'm sharing about food and about movement and about sleep and stress optimization, which I'm just about to share, we will benefit our gut, because what we feed them, they will in turn either help us or hinder us. Those cravings that many of us have for like junk food, the highly palatable foods that I'm telling you to avoid, the sweet tooth, so to speak. It's not a sweet tooth. It's actually a craving that comes from your gut bacteria, the microbiota that live there, the ones that like processed foods. When you eat those processed foods, be it chips, crackers, breads, the scone at Starbucks, whatever that is, it feeds those bacteria. They in turn send a message to your brain and say, hey, eat more of that because we'll survive. And when you eat more of that, more of them will populate, and to your own detriment, because those are the bacteria you don't want to be overpowering your gut, because they're not providing you any benefit. You're providing them with the resources that they can have to not only live, but reproduce, but they're not serving you at all. In fact, they actually serve you up the things you don't want, like inflammation. However, if you feed the healthy gut bacteria, things like lactobacillus, bifidobacterium, the latest and greatest that we're hearing about nowadays is Akkermansia. These are the helpful gut bacteria. When you feed them things like probiotics, prebiotics, which are the fibrous foods, the vegetables, especially the asparagus, the artichokes, my favorite is Brussels sprouts. I love Brussels sprouts. You're actually feeding the good bacteria. And when you feed the good bacteria, they do so many things for you. Did you know that they actually make vitamins that you can use? A lot of the fat soluble vitamins like D, A, K, E, a lot of these can be manufactured by the gut bacteria. They can also help you with your immune health. They actually talk to the immune cells to help you stay healthy and fight infection. So they do so many things for us. They also help produce serotonin through their interaction with the enterochromaffin cells of the GI tract. So there's so many amazing good things that these gut bacteria can do for you if you treat them right, by feeding them the foods that they like, which are basically real food, the fibrous foods, especially the prebiotic rich foods, the probiotic rich foods, which there are literally hundreds of thousands of these. We're familiar with like 10 of them, right? The yogurts, the kefirs, the sauerkraut, the kimchi, tofu, these kinds of things. But there are so many of these probiotic rich foods that are available. Basically, every culture has dozens and dozens, and they are so tasty. And once you kind of start eating them, it's like you start to crave this stuff. I mean, coming from Hawaii, I've always loved kimchi. Other folks like my parents who spent time in Europe, they like sauerkraut better, but I just like kimchi. I like the spicing of it. And once you start eating this stuff, it's like you want to eat more. It tastes good. It has, all kinds of benefits. And so that's the gut health part. You treat them well, they will treat you well. The last thing is stress. Nowadays, oh my gosh, we have been bombarded with so much stressful stimuli. And sadly, what we have not focused on is that we have the power to literally decide right here between our ears how this will affect us. There was a landmark study that I love to share from 2012 that looked at almost 200,000 patients. So giant study. And what they did was very, very simple. They asked these nearly 200,000 people to rate their stress as either mild, moderate, or severe. And then they followed them to see if they had adverse health consequences like disease, heart disease, cancer, and early death. And what they found, typically you might predict, oh, those folks that had the highest level of stress, they're going to have more, health conditions. They're going to die sooner. Well, that was only true in that group that had the highest level of stress that, here's the caveat, that they believed that stress was bad for them. There was another part of those folks that had the highest level of stress that actually believed that the stress was good for them, that it could be growth promoting, that they could use that as springboard, to better their life. Like right now, in the last couple of years, a lot of us have had all these different stressors with the pandemic, and we've had to pivot a lot. Those of us that have decided, hey, this is a challenge. I'm going to see how I can do my job or whatever my work is remotely or differently, or convert from a brick and mortar to online, whatever. We pivoted, and we've used that stress as sort of what they call in psychosocial terms a challenge response. Those folks actually had a protective benefit from that high level of stress. In other words, not only was the stress not bad for them, it did not cause disease, it did not cause early death, but it actually protected them from those health consequences, and they lived longer. And what was different was just what they chose to believe. We literally have that much power and influence over the stressors that hit us from every. We get to decide at the end of the day what meaning we're going to attach to that. If we're going to use it as a challenge response, like the data I just shared, or like Olympians that are out there, right? They think about, oh my gosh, I got to compete at the highest level. I'm going to make this fun. I'm going to challenge myself. This is going to be epic. I'm going to just show the judges, show the whole world what I am capable of, and they excel. But if you went up there and you had to do your double cork backflip on the snowboard on the half pipe, and you were in your mind, you're like, I'm so stressed out. There's so many people watching. I don't think I can perform. Guess what? You're going to fail. Like a lot of it starts right here. It starts in the head. So I wrote a whole chapter on how to optimize the stress that bombards us on a daily basis from all different directions, and how we can turn that from a negative response, which is typically how we view stress, right? Stress is negative, into a positive growth promoting response. So those are the simple steps. They're all actionable, and they're all available at no cost to the reader. So
Yeah, Doc, there was a lot there. I'm going to try to get through this, and I do have some audience questions that we want to get through. But just to kind of cycle back, we'll do first things first to cycle back to the gut health. When they speak about leaky gut, is that what we're talking about? That your gut is open because you haven't been feeding it the right medicine? In medicine, we need food and other
food.
nutritional items.
Yeah, exactly. So leaky gut is exactly that. It's in technical terms, we call it increased intestinal permeability. And the things that cause your gut to sort of open up to all of the bad sort of toxins that are out there is what you eat. So in other words, one of the things that triggers this is gluten, for example, in a lot of people, and processed foods. So in your gut, what most people have no clue about is literally there is a single cell lining. So you have one cell distance between what's literally the outside, right? All the food and the stuff that we feed ourselves. It could be good stuff, the real foods we talked about, or it could be toxins and all kinds of crap. But literally it's a single cell thick that is between us and them, right? The outside world and our internal environment. And if those cells, they're called the intestinal epithelial cells, are not seeing the healthy and health promoting foods, like they're seeing things that are highly processed that are what's called inflammatory. They make they're kind of like Legos all lined up in a row. And where they touch each other, that is called the gap junction. And if that gap opens up because there's inflammation going on, then you can get a lot of toxins come directly from your food into your bloodstream. Like, it's that thin of the barrier. It's much, much thinner than the width of a human hair. So we're talking a super thin membrane that either allows the best possible food into your body, or it's allowing toxins into your body. And what determines that is whether or not you have what you just said, leaky gut. And what causes leaky gut are basically the processed foods, the highly processed grains, flours, the highly processed sugars, and the seed oils. All of those things are known to cause leaky gut. And that is not awesome, because then you get a lot of toxins directly into your bloodstream. And what do? Primarily, they cause inflammation. And inflammation is at the heart of almost every disease, from diabetes to heart disease to cancer, you name it. The neurodegenerative stuff, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and the like, are all inflammatory. Even the mental health conditions, depression, anxiety, OCD, bipolar, all of these things are also inflammatory. And the cool thing now, we're starting to see the connection between gut health and all of these conditions. Most surprising, I think, for many of us like myself as physicians, is that you can literally tell from looking at somebody's bacterial makeup in their gut if they are somebody that's going to be overweight or thin. You can tell by the makeup of their gut microbes. If you showed me just the numbers, this person has XYZ bacteria, I could tell you, oh, that person looks like they'll probably be overweight. Or this person has XYZ bacteria. Oh, it looks like they might have depression. Like, it is that telling.
Wow.
The type of bacteria that you house that grow in your gut literally has direct connection with a lot of the disease processes. And it's only now that we're starting to appreciate this. So it's a really kind of new and exciting area. And there's so much more to be done. But the basics revolve around how we feed ourselves, because what we feed ourselves, we are also feeding them. So paying attention to that is just primordial, super important.